You can't win your league without strong running backs. So, as we enter the final weekend of drafts, I'm taking you through my final running back rankings. Whether you go 0 RB, heavy RB, or RB stack, we'll go through all the best fantasy options on the Fantasy First Down. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley, and welcome to Brisbane, Australia, where I'm not even joking, it's winter in the morning and the temperature has just topped 90 degrees, which is appropriate because I'm ready to bring you some hot takes about running backs. If you haven't already, please make sure you like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down, on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. All of my rankings are up at ffdfantasyfootball.com, and I'll be updating them over the next day or so. Plus, you can check out my articles at football.rasball.com. But today, we are talking about running back rankings, and this is how it's going to work. These are my half PPR rankings, but realistically, they're very, very close to PPR rankings. Obviously, you can push receiving backs up just a little bit, but honestly, there's not actually as much difference as you would think. The reason that I rank in half PPR is simply because that's what the Fantasy Pros ranking competition is in, and therefore I use their applet, and therefore my rankings are going to generally have that natural structure. But if you need PPR rankings or if you've got any questions, make sure you hit me up. I'm happy to tell you how I would adjust them. And there's no real changes in the top 10 except roughly in the middle, but they're still in those same tiers. For me, Christian McCaffrey is still the number one running back in football. Heck, he's the number one player in fantasy football for me. In the vast majority of drafts, I'm taking him first overall, even in PPR leagues, even when it's wide receiver heavy. I just don't think you can find a better player. He's such a weapon. It's such a strong offense. He's going to score a lot of touchdowns. He's going to get a lot of receptions. He's going to get a lot of rushing yardage. Realistically, if he stays healthy, he's going to be very hard to beat. Where things get interesting is after that. Do you take Bijan Robinson or Breece Hall? I know there's been a lot of talk about Breece Hall, but I've been on the Bijan Robinson train the whole time. I think the offense is going to be a lot better. I think he's going to be used a whole lot more heavily. I think he's going to get a lot of reception. So in PPR, that's going to help him as well. They haven't brought in any competition, unlike with the Jets, where they brought in two new backups. I think realistically, it's pretty clearly Bijan over Breece Hall for me now. Having said that, they're still in the same tier for me. If you decide that you want to take Breece Hall over Bijan, not going to argue with you. You can go either way, but most of the top, most accurate rankers do have Bijan over Breece Hall at this stage as well. For me, there's a fair old tier drop-off after that, and next up after that, it is Jonathan Taylor. I do like Jonathan Taylor, especially for fantasy, and just as a talent, he's such a good running back and he's fun to watch. For me, he's in that next group down. I'd be taking him late on in the first round, depending on your settings, but for me, he does fall behind a lot of those kind of mid-range wide receiver ones, especially in PPR, because he doesn't offer you quite the same security as some of those guys with a receiving floor. I don't know that Anthony Richardson's going to check down quite as much as we would like, and that drops Taylor down a little bit for me. Having said that, still a pretty solid gap from Taylor to these next four guys for me. And for me, these four guys go in a group together. Saquon Barkley's still my clear number 5 guy. I do think he's going to be really good in Philadelphia. I think they'll use him more than they used DeAndre Swift. Feel like he's going to be a big part of this offense. The biggest question mark with him is how many touches on the goal line does he lose to the Jalen Hurts tush push and general rushing game. I do think they're still going to use him a lot. I think he's still going to get a lot of receptions as well. For me, he's still a solid number 5, and he slides in just ahead of Travis Etienne, who we saw was the running back 2 last season. I don't think there's any reason to think he's going to drop off massively. I know that Tank Bigsby's being used a lot more in the offseason, but he feels like more of a true handcuff than someone who's going to come in and take a lot of touches. Realistically, they keep talking about using Etienne less and trying to have more of a committee, but when it gets down to it, they're still going to give Trav a whole lot of the ball. Jahmyr Gibbs slides in slightly behind him. My concern here is that David Montgomery is still going to be heavily involved. He does arguably have more upside, pretty much everyone outside the top 3, and certainly if David Montgomery goes down, suddenly he's going to be a top 4 option without doubt. But realistically, there's no reason to think that's going to happen until it actually occurs. We don't know when an injury is going to happen. So if you're looking for true upside, I feel like he's got the most true upside in this group. But I do think that Montgomery's still going to be heavily involved, and therefore I'm not willing to take Gibbs any earlier, especially because that injury just makes me a little bit nervous. Hamstring injuries do tend to kind of push their way into the season a little bit and does increase his risk of getting re-injured, and that makes me a little bit scared. Now, I did have Kyron Williams a little bit higher. I don't like the punt return news at all. Obviously, we saw Sean McVay came out and said that Kyron Williams will be the primary punt returner. That seems crazy to me. They're saying, well, we're looking to get more ways to get the ball into his hands. Hand the ball to him. Just get the ball in his hands that way. It doesn't make any sense to put him in punt return situations. You're increasing his risk of injury. You're putting him in situations we're not really using him effectively. A lot of the time with punt returns, it's just to catch the ball situation. It's not like they're returning the ball a lot of the time. So I don't understand what they're trying to do here. I don't understand why they're doing this. I don't even understand if it's fake news. It's a really weird situation to me. I don't like this situation. I've moved him down past Etienne and Gibbs. I still think he's the clear number one guy, but this does make me nervous about what impact Blake Corum's going to have here. Derrick Henry's number 9 for me, and I do think he's going to be very effective in this offense. Look at what happened with Gus Edwards last year. Gus Edwards is not Derrick Henry, and he was still a very good fantasy option, especially in half PPR. So in half PPR, I do think Henry is a solid option. In PPR, he drops down quite a lot. I think he's my running back 14. He's the main one that gets hurt with the lack of receptions. You're not going to get a lot of receptions out of Lamar Jackson. They've talked about Justice Hill being a legit starter, and they are going to use him on passing downs. Derrick Henry is not going to get anywhere near as many checkdowns as he's got in the last few seasons, but he's going to get a lot of touchdowns. He's going to be very efficient with his rushing. He's going to get plenty of rushing opportunities. I still think he's a top 10 option. And then Rachaad White's my number 10. And this is a bit of a hot take, apparently, which seems crazy to me because he was the running back, 6 last year? They haven't really changed much. They brought in Bucky Irving, but he's a third-day running back. He's not really taking away any particular skill from White. He's basically replacing Chase Edmonds, who wasn't very good and is now on IR all season. So, look, I love Irving as a backup guy, but realistically, Rachaad White is the starter and he's the clear starter. Irving's a good receiving back, but so's White. Irving's an average rushing back, and White's very good in that part of the game. I feel like he's still going to get a heap of touches. The offense is going to run through Rachaad White, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin, and that's it. And they need this offense to be good if they're going to get anywhere near the playoffs again. So Rachaad White's still a top 10 option for me. You can get him later than that. I've got him in the 4th or 5th round in plenty of leagues. He really is falling. He's someone you don't need to reach for. You can probably wait half a round longer than my rankings suggest. And that's fantastic news because you're getting a very good player. Now, for me, White is in the same tier as these next 4 guys, and they're a little bit interchangeable. I don't feel strongly about the order. Isaiah Pacheco's next, but I'm a little bit nervous about them signing Samaje Perine. We know that Perine's a very talented receiving back. I was hoping Pacheco would get that role with Jerick McKinnon out of town. I'm not convinced that's necessarily going to happen with them signing Perine. It might be that we no longer see Pacheco in there on a lot of the third downs, and that's going to really hurt his value. So keep your ear to the ground with that, especially in PPR. He's going to fall a little bit for me, possibly towards the Kamara situation, but in half PPR, he's still going to score a lot of touchdowns. He's still going to get a lot of rushing opportunities and be very effective with them. So I still think he is a solid option. I just can't have him as high as I did before that Perine news came out. The whole backup situation there is weird. I don't know what they're doing with Deneric Prince, releasing him after they had him playing ahead of Clyde Edwards-Helaire at one stage. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is obviously still dealing with some concussion symptoms. You got Carson Steele on the roster, who was a fullback in the preseason and somehow ended up as potentially the lead backup if Clyde's down. So I don't understand what's going on, but realistically, it's a little bit weird, and Pacheco makes me a little bit nervous. Josh Jacobs is clearly the top Green Bay runner. Been a lot of news coming out with AJ Dillon being out for the season. That's actually Emmanuel Wilson who's the backup, and that's not really surprising. I actually said that a month or 2 ago, suggesting that Wilson could be a really good receiving back and could be the true backup, while Marshall Lloyd is more of the early down backup. And that's kind of what we're hearing a lot. Marshall Lloyd missed a lot of the preseason, and I do think that technically Emmanuel Wilson is the backup for now, and that's great for Josh Jacobs because he's not a true threat to his actual workload. I expect Josh Jacobs to get a heap of touches, especially compared to how many we used to see Aaron Jones get. And we saw Aaron Jones be very effective on a lot less touches. So there's no reason Josh Jacobs can't be really good for fantasy this year. James Cook, another solid, very good running back. very good between the 20s. Whether they start using him on the goal line or not, it's going to make all the difference, though. And it's a little bit more as a receiving back as well. They brought in Ray Davis, who's a very big back. We saw them get used in batches during the preseason, in that James Cook would get like a whole quarter, then Ray Davis would get a whole quarter, as opposed to them being used in roles. I don't think that necessarily reflects what's going to happen during the season. It wouldn't surprise me at all if it's Ray Davis getting a lot of the touches on the goal line and in getting receiving work during the season. That would hurt James Cook. But if Cook gets upwards towards 300 touches in this offense, he could be really, really good for fantasy. So I also like his upside. Any of these four guys here and White before them are all in this fantastic range where you can get him in the third round and you're getting plenty of upside. Alvin Kamara is more of a PPR weapon, which is why he's down at 14 here. In PPR, I have him a little bit higher. You're just going to get so many checkdowns from Derek Carr, and they don't really have a lot of other weapons. It's basically Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, and a little bit of Taysom Hill. And that's basically the offense. And it's not a terrible offense. They do score points. So Derek Carr's like a top 20 quarterback pretty much every season. And Kamara is a big reason for that, because he's going to get so much receiving work. He's going to get so many touches. Even in half PPR, those touches are still worth half a point. That means something. So he does have some value here. I do like him in this range. I do think he has league-winning upside if everything goes perfectly right for him and they use him effectively. Kendre Miller starts the season on IR. Realistically, he's probably the running back 3 anyway. Jamal Williams hasn't been very efficient. They use him in more of that grind work. It's just going to be a case of whether they're willing to give Kamara the goal line touches, and that's going to really put him over the top. They said a big tier drop off for me before I'm willing to go down to Joe Mixon. I'm willing to take most of those wide receiver 2s and higher end wide receiver 3s like your Waddles, Devonta Smiths, T. Higginses before I go to Joe Mixon in most leagues. In a half PPR league, I'm probably taking Mixon a little bit earlier depending on your roster construction, but I am very nervous about everyone from this point onwards. There are reasons to be concerned. With Mixon, my primary concern is simply how much they're actually going to run the ball. It does feel like this could be a very pass-heavy offense. Are they going to check down very much? They might. It feels like Mixon's kind of fallen through the cracks a little bit. I think he is the clear number 15. There is another tier drop-off before you get to the other guys after this. And I feel like he's a guy you can just kind of slot in as a good running back too. You don't have to worry about him too much. You know, the role's pretty secure. It's not like Cam Akers is going to come in and take over from him. Damian Pierce definitely won't. So I feel like Mixon's pretty locked into a safe role, and that's better than most of the guys below him. Kenneth Walker, I've moved up a little bit. I do like what we're seeing out of Seattle. I think this offense could be pretty good. It's very clear that Walker's going to be the clear running back again. They haven't really given Charbonnet anything but backup work and receiving work. Walker in half PPR therefore gets a boost. In PPR is a little bit lower because Charbonnet will get a lot of those receiving downs, but gosh, they let Walker run the ball a lot, and he's very effective at doing it. You'll notice I have Devon Achane way lower than everybody else. Most people have him inside the top 10 or in that region, certainly as a running back 1. I don't understand it. I keep saying this over and over again. I just plain don't get it. He's really talented. I had him in college fantasy. He was awesome. He didn't get a lot of touches, but he was awesome when he got those touches. And the same thing's going to happen in fantasy. He's going to be awesome when he gets touches, but he's only going to get like 10 touches a game, 12 touches a game. He's going to have to be extraordinarily efficient, or alternatively, they're going to have to get a big lead so they can actually feed him more touches in the second half. That's going to make him super boom bust. You're going to be relying on long touchdowns. You're going to be relying on weird game script. Realistically, in close games, you're going to see a lot of Raheem Mostert, and you're not going to see a lot of Devon Achane. Now, the problem is there's also limited upside season long, because even if Mostert goes down, Achane doesn't step into his role. He's not suddenly going to become the goal line back. He's not a particularly big guy. That's why they've got Jalen Wright. They spent a day 2 pick, a future day 2 pick, admittedly, a 2025 pick, to trade up to go and get Jalen Wright. They like him because he is a Raheem Mostert replacement. He's got a similar build, similar play style. Realistically, they're trying to keep this thing going. It's the same reason they keep Jeff Wilson. Jeff Wilson is the Devon Achane backup. He's better receiving back. So, look, this whole situation is really ugly in Miami. They will run the ball a heap, but Achane is not the top guy. It's Mostert that's the top guy. I have flirted with the idea of having Mostert ahead of Achane in half PPR simply because I understand that there is so much upside there in his role, and he was the running back 3 last season. Achane was not even the top 12 running back. I don't see that switching around enough. I still think ultimately that Achane had a couple of those ridiculous boom games where he's scoring 4 touchdowns in the second half. I don't think you can rely on the Dolphins beating people by like 90 points to 20 or whatever it was against Denver. That's not going to keep happening. You can't rely on that production. Therefore, Achane is just being taken way too early for me. I like Mostert's upside and security a lot more. The reason I've got Mostert lower is very simple. He's pretty injury prone. He's an older back. That drop-off will happen at some stage, and it's not impossible if things aren't quite going right that they bring Jalen Wright in instead. Ramondre Stevenson has dropped a little bit for me. I'm just a little bit nervous about what we're seeing from Antonio Gibson. Obviously, they gave Stevenson a massive pay bump and a big contract, 4-year contract worth a lot of money. But we've seen the Patriots do that. They give money to players for no particularly good reason. Remember when they signed both Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith and gave them both a heap of money? Realistically, Jonnu did not earn that money. Remember when they gave Kendrick Bourne, and I can't remember who the other receiver was, a heap of money? They didn't really earn that money. They just do this with veterans. They give them way too much money, and I don't think it necessarily means they're going to have a role. Ramondre Stevenson, I do think, having said that, is the lead back in New England. Do you want their lead back? Probably. I do think he's got the talent. We've seen him have a top 10 finish a couple of seasons ago. He was poor last season and got injured. I do expect him to bounce back, but I'm a little bit nervous about his situation compared to where I was previously. But I'm still willing to take him in this general tier. David Montgomery's the same issue. There's some fear there because of the guy behind him, or in this case, probably in front of him, in Jahmyr Gibbs. Does he have that same role? Is he still getting the goal line work? I think it's probably going to be split more this season. Is he still getting enough carries? I think it's probably going to be split and it's going to go towards Gibbs more. There's going to be plenty of situations where they're both out there and Gibbs is running routes. I think this is going to be a really interesting situation to watch, but it makes me nervous for fantasy, and that's why I'm not willing to take him higher, and that's why I've got a real tier drop-off after Mixon, because all these guys come with some risk. Do you remember when you desperately wanted the Vikings running back when Dalvin Cook was going in the first 5 picks of drafts? Nothing has really changed that much there. We just found out that Alexander Madison's not very good. But when Ty Chandler was the lead guy, they looked pretty good, and they brought Aaron Jones in to be the lead back. We know he can be really explosive when given the touches. We know he's a great receiving back, and Sam Darnold will use his receiving back. Remember when he worked really well at the Panthers doing that? I do think that Aaron Jones has a lot of upside, especially in PPR. Problem with Jones, he struggles to stay healthy, and we don't know exactly how much of the role he's going to have because Ty Chandler will be involved because he did look good last season. The weird thing is the Vikings only have 2 running backs on their roster at all at the moment. Now, presumably they'll bring someone in at some point in time, or they'll be activating people from the practice squad on game day. Still a very weird situation, though. I do think that Jones is the main guy. I think he has enough upside to mean taking him in this range makes sense. He's also the last, he and Connor are the last kind of 2 that I feel really particularly good about taking. I feel like they're going to give you a good running back 2 floor. Everyone below that has a significantly more risk. With Jones and Connor, it's more of an injury risk. Connor, I think, is probably the lead back. The reason I'm not willing to put higher, we don't know what's happening with Trey Benson. Trey Benson at the moment is the backup, but if the Cardinals are struggling and you're going into the playoffs and James Conner is somehow still healthy, can you still feel good about him remaining the lead back if the Cardinals are going to start thinking about next year? I don't really like that situation. That makes me scared. I've got a lot of James Conner in Dynasty. I do think he's going to be good, especially early in the season, but he's the kind of guy that I'd want to have, use, and then trade away before the trade deadline. There's then a big old gap down to DeAndre Swift because I don't understand what the Bears are doing. They should be using Swift as their number 1 back, but it's entirely possible it's going to be someone else entirely. I don't know what's going on there. Roschon Johnson's been injured, so we don't know what his role is. Clearly, Khalil Herbert is the backup. I think we're probably going to see that Swift is the main guy, but how much Johnson gets involved on third downs is the real question mark, or is it Travis Homer that's their third down back? Could be DeAndre Swift. He's healthy, but no team seems to be willing to give him the load. So I'm not willing to go all in on Swift. I do feel like he's a solid option. I do have a couple of shares because of the fact that he just keeps on falling, and he is a talented back in what could be a really good offense. I just don't think we have that security about his role. Now, I'm quite high on Devin Singletary compared to a lot of other people. That's because for me, he's the last true every down back. We don't know that he's going to be the every down back, but if you look at everyone below him, no one else there is definitely going to be the every down back. In fact, no one else below him has even a chance of being realistically the every down back. Javonte Williams might be the only exception, but I think we'll talk about him in a second. To me, Singletary kind of has that locked up. There is still that risk that you have with James Conner where late in the season they might go, look, we're struggling. This isn't working. We're not winning games. Let's see what we've got on Tyrone Tracy. Let's see what we've got in whoever else they choose to bring in, Eric Gray. I don't know that that's necessarily going to happen. I do think they see Singletary as being the guy, but he's not a particularly big back. We've seen him work in the goal line, but that's not really his role. The Giants are going to be poor, so you are getting like very low end running back 2 numbers out of him. You're kind of drafting him roughly where you expect him to perform, and you're using him because you're using either a 0 RB strategy. You've gone very heavy on other positions earlier on. I feel like he at least gives you that security of knowing he's going to give you some good production each week. I do think everyone else below him has more upside, but Singletary is very safe. I feel like he's locked into that role at the moment. Then we move into that situation where we've got guys essentially in committees. Zamir White, I didn't think was going to be in a committee. He looked really good down the stretch, but we know he's never going to be the receiving back. I thought it would be Amir Abdullah or maybe Dylan Lowby, and I would have felt significantly better about that because at least they then have to find roles, especially in half PPR. You know that White's getting all the early touches. Instead, it's Alexander Madison. He seems to be the receiving back, but he seems to also be getting the change of pace role. He's not particularly good, but I do feel like he's enough of a threat to White's workload that things could get pretty nervy for White owners in certain games. You kind of want the Raiders to be winning, and I don't know that we can rely on the Raiders to be winning. If they have good games, they're going to use him a lot. In bad games, I feel like he's really going to struggle. I would suggest going over to Razzball and checking out their win-loss tool if you want to see what I mean. White does have quite that split, and we saw it with Josh Jacobs last season as well. But it's going to be even more with White because White doesn't get that receiving work. So I'm not willing to take White any higher than this, even though he is a talented player. Javonte Williams, I've moved up a heap. There was so much preseason talk about potentially him missing the roster. Cecil Lammey, who we all respect a lot, he's such an accurate reporter, spent a lot of time saying that he might miss the roster, that Jaleel McLaughlin's the only one with a clear lockdown role and has a chance at the lead role. It's been very clear from the preseason that it is Javonte Williams who's going to be the lead guy, but it was more of a nervy situation than most expected. I know a lot of people are talking about Audric Estime. He's the backup. He's a round 5 back. That doesn't really mean a lot. Most 5th round backs don't turn into much. So it's not really someone you need to feel is a significant threat. It is going to be Javonte Williams. Just a case of how many touches he gets. And are they even going to be competitive in games? There is a big difference between when they're winning and losing. And when they're losing games, he was getting like under 9 points per game. That's not great. Now, to be fair, he is another year removed from his ACL injury. I remember Jefferson Kazar was saying on the Razzball show with me that he really likes Javonte Williams because he's finally recovered from that injury. He's going to be significantly more effective and efficient. I'm not sure that they're going to give him enough of an opportunity. I think we'll see so much Jaleel McLaughlin, it's going to be annoying. I had Javonte Williams in quite a few leagues last year. They used him in a really annoying way, and the team was solid last year. They finished with, an 8-9 record or something. I don't think we're going to see something similar this year. I think they're going to really struggle with Bo Nix and a lack of weapons. I think that's going to be bad for Williams. They're going to need to run the ball a lot because they can't pass it. But then they're going to be losing, and then they're going to have to pass the ball, and then you're not even going to see Williams. So it could be very frustrating for Williams owners. Najee Harris had moved up a little bit because of Jalen Warren's injury, but it does seem like Warren will probably be back for week 1. He does always have upside, though. If Jalen Warren goes down, all of a sudden Najee Harris, I don't know that he's a league winner, but he's certainly a solid running back too. I think Darrell Patterson still gets involved, and they probably bring someone in off the street, but Najee Harris has enough upside that I feel good about him. I just wouldn't take him ahead of these other guys because I think without that injury, his role is pretty limited. It's the same issue with Tony Pollard. He's probably the lead back over Tyjae Spears, but realistically, they're in a clear committee. I don't know that either of them has significantly more value than the other. I'm just putting Pollard a little bit high because I feel like he's probably going to get slightly more touches, but we don't know exactly how this is going to work out. I'm essentially avoiding both Pollard and Spears in most situations. I just don't see a situation where I'd want to take them. I did take Tyjae Spears in one league very recently, but it was like the 9th round, and I needed a 3rd running back. So I just wanted someone that I knew was going to get touches for bye weeks or if I had an injury. Same situation in Washington. I think Brian Robinson's the main guy. He is the more talented back these days. Austin Eckler's been very good, but he's not as explosive as he used to be. He's still a strong receiving back, but I'm not sure that you can really rely on Robinson being the guy consistently. For that reason, I've got him further down, but I still think that he's got more upside of turning into the every down back compared to Eckler, who could potentially just fall off based on his age and what we saw from him last year. You can see I've got Eckler all the way down at 35. That's just because I don't really see a clear path to being an every down back. I feel like even if we see an injury to Brian Robinson, you probably see Jeremy McNichols come in and still get a lot of early down touches, and that's enough to make me very nervous. Jalen Warren also slides back, obviously. I don't really see it. I don't know what the path to him being a good fantasy producer is. He was great last season when you got him practically free, but now you're paying a lot more for him. And what's the point? What's the upside? Is he ever going to be an every down back? Najee Harris doesn't exactly have an injury history, and every running back can get injured. But even if Najee goes down, do you really think they're going to be using Jalen Warren a heap in early down work on the goal line? No. They're going to use a bigger back. They're going to use Patterson. They're going to use somebody else. I just don't see it for Warren. I don't see the path there. Cincinnati situation is really awkward as well. There's a lot of committees in this range. Zach Moss and Chase Brown are both a little bit lower for me because I just don't know that they're going to run the ball a lot this year. And even if they do, I don't know which of these guys has a path to being a clear, good every down back. I feel like Moss has the size to at least do it, and we've seen him do it in Indianapolis, but not the greatest receiving back. Chase Brown isn't small, but I'm not sure that he really has that early down workload sort of guy that we need. If Zach Moss goes down, do they hand it all over to Chase Brown? Maybe, but I don't know that upside is quite as clear, and that's why he's a little bit lower for me. Obviously, Chargers have a committee going as well, but Gus Edwards is the clear number one guy for me. We've seen he can be very effective, but I'm a little bit nervous just about what the Chargers offense is going to look like in general. I think in half PPR, he's got more upside than most of the guys in this range, but the floor's pretty low too, because there are a lot of paths to him just not being involved much, and there's a lot of paths to this being like a 3 or 4 way committee. They keep adding running backs. They just signed Hassan Haskins, for example. They've got 5 active running backs because they've got Edwards, Dobbins, Kamani Vidal, the rookie. They just signed Haskins, as I said. And they've also got Jarrett Patterson, who's playing ahead of Vidal at times during the preseason. It's really weird to have that many active running backs, but they're going to use the running game a lot. And I think they're going to spread it out more than we would like them to. Jerome Ford's obviously the starter at the moment because Nick Chubb is starting on PPR. The reason I've got him so low is not because he's not going to be effective early in the season. It's because he's not going to be effective later in the season. That's when you win your leagues. I do think he's going to finish significantly higher than the running back 34, especially in the early part of the season. But I don't know. I don't want a guy who's not going to be fantasy relevant when I need him down the stretch. When I'm in the playoffs, that's when I want my best running backs. Having said that, you're taking him so late that arguably, especially if you're going 0 RB, you're probably going to have better options by then anyway. So he's a strong 0 RB option, but I feel like he's a very weak option if your plan is to stash him on your bench for some reason. Zeke and Rico Dowdle are fighting it out for that Dallas job. I feel like it's going to be a clear committee. We've seen that be valuable in the past when it was Zeke and Tony Pollard, but in that situation, it was ultimately Rico Dowdle's equivalent, Tony Pollard, that you wanted. And that gives Dowdle some upside. The problem is we don't know exactly what the role is going to be. Do we see a lot of Zeke because he is a good pass protector, because he's a good receiver out of the backfield? Do we see enough of Dowdle? There have been reports coming out that Dowdle's going to play less on special teams. That'll really help his value because it means that they see him as more of an every down back, or more of at least a back that's going to be heavily involved. And I like that for him. It's just a real question mark of exactly how they use him and what that looks like. And that's why I can't have either of these guys higher. I do think we probably see a little bit more passing game in Dallas, but it's hard to feel great about either of their backs. Jonathan Brooks obviously is going to be out until at least week 5, potentially longer. I think that it might take him a while to really, truly get back into this offense. I think he probably comes back around week 5, 6, or 7, and then it's a committee for another 4 or 5 weeks, and then he finally takes over towards the end of the season. This is a lot to pay for a guy that you're not using for half the season, and then you get Carolina's running back, who's coming off an ACL injury and might not be very explosive. I just don't feel great about it, but I also don't feel great about Chuba Hubbard, which is why he's even lower than this, because he's going to lose the every down role when you want him most, and he's not going to be particularly valuable even before that. So I don't like this situation at all. Nick Chubb I've got at 40 simply because there's still upside. He's still Nick Chubb, and down the stretch he could take over that lead down role. I don't know that that's going to happen, but I feel like there's enough upside there that I'm willing to take the chance. Now we're talking about backups and the key backups. Talked about Hubbard before. He's more of a 0 RB guy, but there's a lot of value here and a lot of my favorite handcuffs. Blake Corum, massive upside if he gets the lead role. Ty Chandler, massive upside, more chance of getting the lead role, and I do think he's going to be a little bit involved anyway. Ray Davis, clear path to the lead role. James Cook goes down, and he is going to be the guy. Jalen Wright, Raheem Mostert goes down. We saw he was the RB3 last season. Suddenly Jalen Wright goes into that role. Tyler Algier goes straight into Bijan's role if there's an injury. Zach Charbonnet goes straight into Kenneth Walker's role if there's an injury. Antonio Gibson, very clear backup to Ramondre Stevenson. All of these guys just need one injury and suddenly they're every down backs. Alexander Madison will provide a little bit of value at the moment. Plus, I feel like we do generally like the Vegas back if they're going to be an every down back. And I kind of feel like if Zamir White goes down, suddenly Madison becomes closer to an every down back than White was. He's just not quite as good at it. As for the other guys in here, J.K. Dobbins, to me, is probably still a backup, but it might be that he emerges as the starter later in the season as he gets healthier. Look, there's a lot of good options below this that are also solid handcuff guys, but these are my favorite guys that you want to be taking late in drafts and filling your roster with. Now, if you're not sure how to draft and you've got questions about that, I'm here to help. I want to personalize rankings specifically for your league. You've got leagues coming up in the next few days. Hit me up quickly. Let me make up some rankings for you. It's only $10 US. They'll be perfectly and exactly specified to your league. They will help you draft and win your league, especially if you haven't been doing this for a long time. Makes it a lot easier to have a list you know you can rely on. And I give you a whole heap of draft strategy as well. You can email me at benwasley23@gmail.com, or you can hit me up on all of my socials, Instagram at the Fantasy First Down, Twitter, Fantasy First Down with no O. My website's obviously ffdfantasyfootball.com, and you can check out my articles while we're at it at football.rasball.com. Plus, it would be great if you like and subscribe on YouTube as well. I'll be back tomorrow, and I'll be taking you through my wide receiver rankings. Good luck with all your drafts. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.